Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Greg Liar podcast and YouTube channel. Today here I have with me the mystery guest, which is Nick Freiling. Nick is my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding. He's someone who I have had a lot of I talk to him every single day, and I have a lot of deep conversations with him. And so what will be different about this is it'll basically be us having one of our normal conversations about a topic that is interesting to both of us, but now we're recording it, and so you get to kind of eavesdrop on stuff that we normally talk about. And it's stuff that is really pertinent to what's going on right now. So Christmas just happened, and that means that there's a big discussion to be had about materialism. Not that Christmas is not that necessarily anyone who celebrates Christmas is materialistic, but there are but that does kind of bring up some tension. And then the other reason I wanted to do this podcast, and this is probably the biggest impetus for this podcast, is that my last podcast was with Shane Claiborne, episode 21, and that already has more views than like the last 10 episodes of my podcast, and it was on wealth inequality, and Shane and I were able to have a really good discussion, but it was 45 minutes, and it was like we opened up a can of worms, and then we ended the podcast, and at the end it felt like there was so much more that needed to be talked about. And so Nick is someone that I've been talking to about some of these things, and I've gotten emails from people and messages from people saying that they listened to that podcast several times. They took pages of notes on the podcast, and it just seemed like there was a lot of people wanting to have a more fuller discussion on it. And so that's why I brought Nick here. He's someone whose conversational skills I really respect, and I'm just happy to have someone like that on the podcast. So Nick, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. One of my goals for this year was to get on a podcast, and here we are.
January 2nd.
So that's done. I can check that off.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically set for the year at this point, goals-wise.
Yeah, just coasting now.
Well, I guess I wanted to start off with a question for you that I will leave very open-ended. And so the question I have for you is, what did you think of my podcast with Shane Claiborne?
Yes, so Shane is someone I've followed on and off very loosely since high school, probably for 10 years. And every time, his message, as you probably have seen, is pretty similar. It's been the same for a long time. But every time it strikes me how unique it is. So he's the only person I hear talking about his particular issue, and you and him overlap in a lot of ways, but I think it is a little bit different. So I'm always struck at how, it's only from him that I hear this from, and as easy as it is to understand, and as much as it relates to scripture and so much of what we talk about. It's funny that it's so rare that I hear this particular message. It's so rare that I hear discussions about wealth that are as deep and honest as that. So that was really the main takeaway, is that as simple of a message as it is, it's something I don't hear often. And it was refreshing to hear, and it was challenging to hear.
Yeah, how would you? That's true. Like when Shane was talking about stuff, there was some amount of controversy around the episode because he said some things that some people found to be, some people didn't really agree with how he thinks that you should go about living your life in regards to the reality of poverty. And so there was some controversy around that, but I'm wondering, what was it? What did you find about his message that was striking? Like, how would you describe his message, and why did it resonate with you?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, I guess, just personal application. Wealth. We all think about wealth. It's every day we're thinking about wealth, but and then when it comes to giving and charitable giving, it's something that everyone has a sense of in the back of their mind. They all want to give more, but in his case, it's like, here's an actual personal application, the example of his life and a lot of the things that he suggests. That's where I think his message is unique, and he's one of the only people I hear that talk about that, especially in a Christian context. Not just, here's the dangers of money, the dangers of wealth, be thankful for your blessings, and give to the poor. But no, here's the way you can actually do that in real time. That's what I don't hear often, but it's what I hear from Shane.
So this is where I think some of the controversy came in, because some of what he was saying seemed to be a critique of what other people were doing. So, but what was it about what he was saying that you should do yourself that you found so compelling? Basically, that you should basically give away most of your money. Like, how would you describe what his prescription was?
I mean, yeah. So if there's anything, and a lot of what my view on wealth and poverty and giving actually comes from you, having talked to you so often, knowing that you're engaged in this world, every day. So a lot of that's gonna, I think there's gonna be some similarities, but the he of course gives away a lot of his money, as far as I can tell, or he doesn't make much money, and his goal is to be amongst the poor, if I'm not mistaken, live
Hmm.
amongst the poor. Um, and it's a radical step for 99% of people to do something like that. And I think that alone is a little bit, it's just uncomfortable, maybe off-putting. It's like you agree with the ideas, like again, like I kind of laid it out. You be thankful, give to charity, understand that money can be and is the root of all evil. But those are ideas that are easy to accept and endorse personally, but not easy to apply. And when it comes to applying them, that's just where it gets difficult.
Yeah. Well, so that's when I talked to Shane, to me, the thing that he highlighted that I found the most valuable was about having a relationship with the poor and how
Mm.
uncommon that is. And this, I mean, that's a big reason for why I started DonorSee is because I was living in this really impoverished context and I couldn't, like, I didn't realize poverty. I didn't fully grasp that poverty existed on the level that it does. And so when I realized that while I was living over there, I wanted to help explain to people what poverty looks like. And so that's why that's kind of like the impetus for starting DonorSee was like at the most fundamental level, it was about helping people like realize it because people are not engaged with the poor, and to some extent, it's like how much is it their fault? Like you just kind of you're born somewhere, and then you just
Mm.
hang out with people, and then you get a job, and it's hard to really know what to do about that.
Yeah, so that brings up another point that I listened to this with. There were some other people listening, maybe just in the background. I think some of them were listening a little more closely than they let on. But I think a lot of where his message and a lot of messages like that can be a little bit off-putting is when you don't acknowledge or even sometimes over acknowledge like the why the poor are poor, and especially in the context of this country. There's opportunities that a lot of people have, and in this country, for example, I know this is not true for every single person, but there's kind of a baseline level of opportunity, a baseline level of rights. There's a safety net, if you will, and I think so. When you start talking about the poor and you don't like emphasize, overemphasize that, hey, a lot of them are that way by their own, choices and decisions, and they had opportunities. It just seems to me like there's a lot of people that don't want to have the discussion without making that so abundantly clear that some people are there
Hmm.
because of their own decisions. When I think maybe a better way to look at it, in a way that I've maybe picked up a little bit from you and from following Shane, is there's relief and charity for the poor, and then there's also causes of poverty, and those things don't necessarily have to be tied up all the time, such that you have to think about every time you give, why is this person poor? Are they going to give you, if you see a homeless person, are they going to give, are they going to spend the money you give them on, drugs? And tying those up together all the time, I mean, there's always going to be a reason why somebody's poor, at least in this country, I think. I mean, a lot of people are born in poverty, but there's always going to be some kind of explanation you can come up with somewhere, somehow. Well, this person could have got a job, or this person could have studied harder, or what have you. So I think it's important, though, not to tie that up with aid for the poor, because the fact is, as you know, there's poor people and they need
Well,
help.
so I mean, like, let's play devil's advocate with
Now.
that. Let's play devil's advocate with that. Like, so, like, I mean, I don't want to come across as the guy who's saying like, be super careful where you give your money, but because obviously I don't really live that out. I think that you should be like recklessly generous in some ways, but there is the very real reality that sometimes when you want to like sometimes you are fostering someone's bad habits by
Mhm.
by being compassionate or generous in an unthoughtful way, right? Acting with your heart instead of your head. And so I think it's a lot of people, and I mean, I wander into this camp every now and then too, and it just kind of depends on the day. But I think a lot of people would say like, are you actually being generous? Are you actually being compassionate if you are not being thoughtful about the way that you're engaging with the poor?
Mhm. I think when it becomes a reason not to engage, that's a problem. Um, and then I think kind of the thrust of Shane's message is like a lot of people just aren't doing it at all, and they don't have any sense whatsoever. So it is the causes of poverty. Is it really like so strong and so obvious that it's people's bad decisions and therefore you just don't engage whatsoever? So I mean, I think like I understand. I'm guessing I could predict a lot of the controversy from that conversation, like what the substance of it,
Yeah.
just by nature of having read a lot about this stuff and hearing you talk about it a lot, talking with you about it. And I think I mean, I get that, and frankly, I think Shane gets it too. But he drives the same message home, time after time. And I think his point is just like start engaging, and that's it, and then see what happens. He talked about wealth as a relational issue, and that's a framing that I think most people don't think about at all, and that's something I think is very helpful.
Okay, so a while back I wrote a blog post that like not very many people read because it was purely like an informational factual blog post, but it talked about the steps of from going from not being a very generous person to becoming a generous person effectively. And the steps I laid out were, the first step is that you have to realize that poverty exists. Like that's a step that not many people even like get to in the first place. Like they just don't want to acknowledge that poverty exists. The second step is, okay, you see poverty, you want to do something about it, but you realize that it's actually like really messy. And so that you have to realize that you can't just like throw money at problems. You can't just be compassionate. You can't just like tweet stuff. Like because when you do those things, sometimes there's negative consequences. So then the third step is that you realize that there are ways to help people that are effective. You just learn that it is possible to help people in effective ways. Like you can malaria nets or deworming or things that may be more applicable to stateside stuff if you care about that. And then the fourth step is kind of like understanding all of that together and acting on it in a radical way. But yeah, anyways, I've had this thought that you really do have to go through kind of like all those steps to be someone who's going to be like both generous and effective at the same time. And I don't know how to get people. I think one of the things I wonder about with Shane's approach, and like I'm not criticizing him, like obviously he lives it out in several different ways. But I think one of the things is it's hard to like, on a pragmatic level, I just want people to get there. Like what are the steps to get people from not generous to generous? And then like I want to help people along in that journey instead of just pointing it out a bunch. But maybe I don't know, maybe it should.
Yeah, well, I think I read that blog post you wrote about, and the step one, acknowledging or recognizing the extent of poverty. I guess maybe where I see Shane in your conversation is like that is step number one, and that's a step that vast majority of people have never taken, and it's a step I never would have taken unless I talked to you about this over the past few years. It's something that I was never exposed to intentionally as a kid. Not to anybody's fault. It's just, as you just mentioned, Shane, like you and I went to the same high school. We had a very, very similar upbringing, I'm guessing. So it's just not part of that world. And so I think maybe Shane stops there at number one, and his approach is more, again, raising awareness, just getting people to engage and breaking that relational barrier that I think he noted a few times between the wealthy and the poor.
Yeah. And so then the question becomes like, how do you break that barrier? Because it's not like you can just walk outside and like I mean, it's not, I don't know, it's not easy. I live in the States now. I used to live in Malawi, and I had lots of relationships with people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, but it is harder when you're in the States.
Yeah, and I have I mean, frankly, I have no experience outside of the States, but so personally, a lot of what I feel is like exposure to poverty, at least in the US, comes through my wife, who's a nurse. A lot of the stories she hears from her patients, she works on a particular floor at a particular hospital where a lot of the patients are there. I mean, frankly, every night there's someone who's homeless. A lot of them live in poverty, and that's why they're there. That is the extent of my exposure, I feel like, but it's week after week after week, it's the same stories of the same kinds of people, and the type of help they need is typically very, very basic. And there is a lot of opportunities, I'm sure, for them. But the fact is, like, I never would have known about this community at all, given the way I grew up, given where I grew up. Again, not anybody's fault, but I mean, it's more prominent, I think, than a lot of people realize. Like the number of people in need, and it might not be like basic material need. And the stuff Shane was talking about wasn't necessarily either. It was like air conditioning, which, as you know, is not something that's prevalent in Malawi. It's not like a basic necessity of life, but it's something 99% of people enjoy and don't even think about. That there's a lot of people that, they're not 99%, but there's a lot of people that don't have it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that I struggled with when I was listening to him was there was like a quickly jumping back and forth between what a person should do and like what we should demand of the government to do. And I think that was like obviously one of the criticisms that came up a lot was people were saying that I mean, Shane brought up things like a maximum wage, and he talked about things like how we can use structural forces to eliminate inequality. And a lot of people see that as like, well, that has like adverse consequences. And then people like, I think that's correct. And I think that may be why some of his, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I there was definitely some things he said and some things I hear from people like him who advocate for the poor through like these community efforts or government efforts. I don't spend a lot of time even thinking about those. I'm pretty, I studied economics. I'm not an economist, but like the market is really, really important. And, there's a lot of ideas that seem like they make a lot of sense, that seem like no-brainers, just cap people's salary and give the rest to the poor. But the fact is, like, there's been a lot of that type of redistribution around the world for a long time, and it really hasn't done a whole lot. So I guess that is kind of a point where I do disagree with Shane. I don't, but I don't really fault him or anyone like him for that. Again, because I kind of see him and people like him as raising awareness at this first level and trying to get people to understand like the depth of the problem. And if talking about these solutions, these possible solutions, and like you said, there's a lot of back and forth of different possible ways to help. If just talking about them in any way is helpful toward getting people to understand, that they should be doing something personally. In addition to maybe these other ideas, I think that's very valuable.
So I guess one of the things that comes across to me, and I think I see this because I have the people who donate on DonorSee. I see them as pretty generous people, and I see them as people who are pretty aware. And when they see some of Shane's comments, they say like I want to help the poor. I just don't want to be called evil because I don't agree with your policies.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, to me, it brings up this discussion. It brings up this idea that we're heading into a space where it's really hard to have conversations where two people think differently and they don't think the other is like a bad person. Like, I don't think Shane is a bad person. Shane doesn't think I'm a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But people who exist on either side of our spectrum often do perceive things that way because of how limited our conversations are at the moment.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I think maybe in the context of this discussion about poverty, it's important that nobody on either side faults anybody for not endorsing certain policies, and that it really comes down to what are you doing personally, and whether or not you support these other ideas, that's a different question entirely in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where I come from. Personal generosity to me is like the ultimate question.
Mm-hmm.
And then like government policies and these other things are so complicated, and the idea that like you can want a certain thing and someone else doesn't want that government policy, and because they don't want that thing, they're evil and I'm good. Like, I just think that stuff is such a distraction. Like it actually distracts us from working together to actually help the poor in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree totally. And that's true not just for helping the poor, it's true for a lot of problems that like broad-based policies like that are designed to solve or are supposed to solve. A lot of it just comes down to personal action and personal behavior.
Yeah, well, having said that, I don't want to come across like I'm faulting Shane, because like I really admire him. Like for starters, he had a conversation with me, which is not, that's like 1,000 times more valuable than someone who just virtue signals all the time or what have you. So I was really, really grateful for that. But okay, so I want to kind of pivot, because I think one of the things that's of interest to you and I, and we've been maybe dancing around it a little bit and mentioned it at the beginning, is the discussion of poverty and generosity within the Christian context and within the context of the church. And it seems like a discussion that's not happening. Is that your perception? Is that your perception? I'll leave it.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And this is something that I definitely have taken from you. So it's not like this is an original thought. In talking with you and in thinking about wealth in particular, not just poverty and aid, but just wealth in general, it's definitely a conversation that's not happening.
Yeah. So, but why? Like, I'm still puzzled by it, because it seems like something that comes up a lot in the Bible, something that Jesus talks about constantly, something that like a lot of even Christian figures throughout history and modern day, they talk about it, but now it's like they talk about it from the comfort of a stage where people can like comfortably listen and decide whether or not they want to accept part of it or not. I don't want to come across as judgmental, but there is this like strange, like, shouldn't this be like one of the main things we talk about? Is how I think about it.
Especially like at our place, in our time, in our setting.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
Or it should be. Yeah, I think there's two reasons. I think one of them is that the conversation is when you kind of hit on this, is hijacked a lot by people that have ideas that just aren't necessarily true. Like, we need more government aid for the poor. And so like sometimes you start talking about it and these are the solutions that are brought up. And for various reasons, people don't like it, and so they don't want to talk about it, if that makes sense. So that's one of the reasons, I think. Number two is what was number two? Oh, yeah, is that I think there's a sense, at least in the United States, I don't know if this is true around the world, of like, it's a very strong sense of justice. And we have this idea, like, so property rights, for example, wealth is about property, it's about what you own. And we have like a very, very strong sense of that. And actually, I thought about this in anticipation of this podcast. And I think we have like a artificially powerful sense of, or artificially strong sense of justice and what's right and wrong. We think, so in the United States, you work for what you earn, and what you earn is yours to keep. And, your father did the same before you. And if someone wants to take what's yours and give it to someone else, that's just like downright wrong always. And then it kind of like leaks into our sense of our own decisions of who to give to and if we should be giving at all. And it's kind of a, it's like even that becomes something hard to talk about when it's our decision ultimately. And it shouldn't weigh into our decisions of how generous to be, thinking about this sense of, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. I heard a story, it wasn't from you, it was actually from another missionary who worked in Southern Africa, talking about somebody who had their home robbed. And they like weren't upset about it. The person, actually, this might have been from you. The person who was robbed wasn't upset about it in the way you would expect someone here in the United States to be. Now, there's like good and bad in that. And there's one sense where they ought to be upset because this was their stuff. But in the other sense, maybe that's an appropriate response. It's kind of a different understanding of mine and yours. It's a different understanding of material possessions that I think might be a little bit of a better perspective, a little bit more of a biblical perspective, and certainly one that I think Shane would endorse.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the people in the movie. Did you see Les Mis or read the book?
Yeah.
Okay, so
the book was too long.
Yeah, so you said you read the part of the book?
No, I saw the movie.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the movie, there's like a bishop who gives candles to the guy who steals from him. Like, do you remember that scene?
Yeah,
so there's this bishop invites this guy into his house, and the guy's like sleeping, and then the guy who's staying at the bishop's house takes like a bunch of gold from his house and leaves, and then he's caught by the police, and the police bring him back, and he's put in front of the bishop, and the police are like, we're about to like really nail this guy because he's been like, he just stole this stuff from you. And instead of the bishop saying, "Yeah, I'm so glad you caught him. Let's put him away, boys." Instead of saying that, the bishop says, "Hold on just a second. He forgot something." And he goes and he gets the two like nicest like gold-plated candlesticks, and he says, "This man forgot these candlesticks," and he gives it to the man, and then he tells the man, go off and make something of yourself. And then this transformative thing which leads him, that sets it up. Anyways, that's a brief scene in the movie. In the book, the bishop's character is fleshed out for like 100 pages. That's like a 2 or 3 minute scene in the movie, but that's like the first 100 pages of Les Mis, which is like a 1,600 page book. It's all about the bishop. It's about this guy who's just like abundantly generous, and the way that he thinks about things is like, he's got these like nuns around him and stuff, and the nuns are telling him like, well, you need to have better security, and you need to be careful about people coming in and stealing stuff. And he always like kind of responds by saying like, if someone steals from me, that person like really needs what they stole from me more than I need it. So I'm glad that they have it. And it's this like that mindset where like private property is not not protected. Yeah. I find that mindset super compelling. And I find the idea that you can just have your stuff taken from you. Even maybe it's not stealing, maybe it's like a fire or something like that. And like from a Western capitalist perspective, that's a very inefficient idea. But from the perspective of like being someone who's trying to be generous and trying to consider like the poor of equal or even greater value than yourself, that seems like a good, like, it seems like a very compelling perspective for me to have. And obviously, like, I think that's what you're getting at. Like, there is an element to it where it's like, it's almost, in some ways it's better, in some ways it's worse. Anyways, it's just one of those perspectives that's not talked about, but I find it like super interesting. And Francis of Assisi is another actual character in real life who had a similar mentality when it came to his possessions.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that Shane he brought this up when he talked about Jubilee, which I don't understand fully, but it's as far as I understand, I think it was every few generations, or maybe it was every generation at some point in time, the Hebrew people would like give back land that was bought and acquired over time back to the original owner or the original family, what have you. So it was kind of like it's like a reset, if you will. And so, in that context, I know that was a different context, but like it was perfectly acceptable to God. Obviously, it's in Scripture to, that all the progress someone has made over, I think it was every 70 years, I'm not sure, in acquiring property and building wealth, it's all given back to the original owners to prevent the type. I'm guessing it prevented the type of inequity we might see in like a super feudal system, or even today. And it struck me when he said, like, or he kind of implied, like, why is that such a hard idea for us to accept? I mean, that's like unthinkable in the modern context to say that every 70.
I mean, I can give you an example for why it's unthinkable. I think when I look at the amount of prosperity that's been created, especially for the poorest half of the world over the last several decades, one of the reasons prosperity like that is created is because people are given so much freedom to acquire wealth and then to invest that wealth and to create more and more value for the world in a way that lifts lots of people out of poverty. And so I think one of the reasons that people find it so hard to digest is because the poorest half of the world over the last 30 years has like doubled their income, something like that. And they're still, like right now they're at like $2.50 a day as opposed to $1.25 a day. It's still like appallingly poor, but like what other mechanism has helped the poorest people on the planet better than the freedom provided by capitalism? And obviously it's like messy and there's lots of greed and there's lots of other stuff that goes along with it. But like, what's done a better job of that? Like, if you truly care about the dispossessed and the people who are just like on the margins of society, shouldn't, like, if you really care about them, would you want to enforce a policy that that would go against the only thing that we know of that's been super effective for those groups of people? That's me setting up my best argument for that perspective.
Yeah, well, I agree with that argument. My point is more in terms of your mindset. Like, it's the idea of some type of, wealth sharing, like what was alluded to by Paul in Scripture more than a few times. Like, is that idea absolutely 100% out of bounds forever for you personally in the way you think about your stuff? And should it be? Because I think for a lot of people it is. And should it be that
I
way?
see. Okay, because like I was about to jump down your throat and be like, hold on a second, Nick. Like a lot of the stuff that's in the Bible is voluntary. Like people do it
Right.
voluntarily.
Right. Yeah.
And but
I
what your
mean,
point is, like this idea of like sharing your wealth,
mhm.
like why do we react so? Why do we push back against it so much? And I do kind of see where you're coming from with that. Like it's not that
More,
it's a good policy or bad or effective or ineffective. Like that's not what you're talking about. What you're saying is like is we should just be more comfortable with the idea of
yeah, why is
holding
it?
our possessions loosely.
Yeah, exactly. Why is it unthinkable? And should it be unthinkable? And I'm like 100% proponent of free markets, of capitalism, um, probably more so than even like the average free market advocate. And nevertheless, I don't think that means that we need to like adopt like spiritually the same perspective to our stuff. You know, like my stuff is my stuff, your stuff is your stuff, and whether I want to give it away is up to me only. That may be true like legally or politically, but it doesn't need to be like the whole orientation of the way we think about our wealth.
Okay, so let me bring something up that I like. This is an uncomfortable conversation. I bet you people listening to this are like, like the idea of having to just like open up their hand that, it's uncomfortable for me. And
Mhm.
what I want to bring up is you have two kids
Mhm.
and the idea that like, you could work really hard and just your wealth could just kind of go away. Your kids might not be as set up for the future, but like at the same time, other people might have more opportunity because of that. Doesn't that does that all at all feel irresponsible or um I mean, you know what I'm getting at. You've got two kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't that make you uncomfortable?
Well, yeah. So I'll answer this. I wrote something a little while ago, or it might have just been some tweets. I don't know. But the the idea of saving for college is like a huge. College is so expensive. It's like a huge no-brainer by now. Like kids are supposed to go to college. Apparently, they have to go to college. And saving for college, like you'll never be able to afford it ever. And so 90% of people will never be able to actually pay for their kids' college without a loan. And so what happens is like it gives you an excuse to, say like, look, I'm underwater already because I got kids, and I can't give anything and I'm in debt. And it just becomes like a big excuse to do nothing, or to almost in a way it's like hoard, like you're putting away hundreds of thousands of dollars you don't need, you'll never touch, you're just going to send it to a college for your kids. And so I think like to answer your question more specifically, like, well, I guess what the point of that is that you have to be really careful when thinking about like how much you need and how much your kids need. And like you say, you want to give your kids, you want to give them the world. But what does that really mean? Like, none of us at the end of the day says like money is going to make you happy, or even that a college education is going to make you happy. Education will make you happy, but or might make you happy. But going to college, an expensive college, is not necessarily going to make you happy. But nevertheless, we don't live that way. And to answer your question specifically, so say to be like extreme about it, this Jubilee example where at the end of my life, say I endorse this idea that I give everything away and leave nothing, nothing behind, give it all to the poor. Is that? I guess I go back to what I said, like that shouldn't be an unthinkable idea. And your kids, what's going to make your kids happy and successful doesn't have much to do with money. Maybe like that sounds like a very privileged perspective because I'm not in poverty, and people that have no money may not say that, but you may have experience with people that are super poor and agree with you that money doesn't bring happiness. Money brings a lot of things that doesn't bring happiness. And so what do you want to give your kids, and does it um, is it? I think we get too caught up when thinking about raising our kids, giving to our kids, showering our kids with things and with blessings and with opportunities. For so many people, I think that just like it's just money and dollar signs. That's what we think of.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of a similar conversation when it comes to your kids and how much you spend on your kids and how much you like where's the line. I think of a similar conversation can be had and has been had on this podcast before about weddings.
Mm-hmm.
Where obviously it's a special thing, it's a joyful event, it's a celebration. You should do all that stuff. Um, but there is I remember back when I was writing more inflammatory blog posts, I wrote a blog post called like,
The good old days.
yeah, the blog post was something like, was called, why do we spend so much money on weddings? And it was just like basically asking a bunch of questions like, does
Mhm.
this really make sense? The amount, in comparison to, so in relation to so many other things. And of the blog posts I wrote, that was one of the ones that had like the most emotional reaction to it, because people were just, it's like a sacred cow. It's like something you don't talk about. You like you let it happen. And
Well, I think college falls into the same category for a lot of people, like saving
yeah,
$8,000 for your kid's college education. And when everybody knows, like that's not what's going to make your kid happy. Nobody says that. I'm going to pay my kid's got to go to this college, and then they're going to be happy. Um,
mhm.
so I think but I think if you would have a similar response if you were to write something about that. And that's, I mean, frankly, it's like way more of an expense than weddings are.
Yeah, I was thinking like the response might even be stronger than
Yeah.
than the wedding one.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it is such an uncomfortable idea because people do want to set themselves up for success. And what Shane talked about, one of the things that Shane talked about that I've been thinking about was, he said it's not how much you give away, it's how much you have left over. And I
Mhm.
found that to be very intriguing. Um, and it plays into this conversation because if like it's easy, if you give away 10% of your income to the poor, and then you save 10%, and then um, that, that's like seems like, most people would say, oh, that's a financially wise way to spend your money. But they would say that whether or not you're making like, $30,000 a year, or whether you're making uh, $3 million a year. Like we look at those as like equal things. And so the person who is making $3 million a year, who's putting away 20% in different places, and then lavishly spending the other 80%, or investing the other 80%, whatever it is that they're doing with that, um, we just we see them as kind of the same. But what Shane talked about, and I'm not sure I agree with this. I'm not sure I agree with this, but what Shane talked about was that if like that person is actually kind of like being selfish or kind of hoarding, because they don't, at the end of the day, come up at the same level as the 30K person.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I don't really know how to respond except to say I think so much of it is just personal and contextual.
Okay, so that's, yeah, I mean that's like my whole point is,
Mhm.
why is there so much fixation on what other people should do?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think there's anger and frustration in regards to how poor people are, especially people that live and work with them. But I mean, I don't see that from you. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I give Shane like the benefit of the doubt,
Hmm.
like any point that I disagree with him on, because like it's him, it's his message or no message, because there's nobody else really doing exactly what he's doing, talking about our relationship to poverty. There's a lot of people like you and others that are working on aid and empowering the poor. And he
Hmm.
talks about that, but mostly I think his message is like, look, this is what it looks like, and this is how we need to be thinking about it. So, but so in that sense, like I give him the benefit of the doubt. I do think though that that it's very personal and contextual. So it's something that I talk with my wife about a lot is how spoiled my son is. My probably both my kids will be, but my daughter's only 8 months old. But like we want to expose him to poverty because like he is so spoiled, not because we spoil him. I think we do a good job of trying to not spoil him, but we want to expose him to that world because I think it's important that he understands what's important for him spiritually and then even like professionally. And so it's like I feel like there's been a generational change. Not everyone thinks like I do, but I think like as wealth accumulated, like Americans became vastly more wealthy between the 50s and the 70s, like vastly more wealthy. And there wasn't like no one was sitting around thinking about, like I have food every night. Some people don't. Is it? It's this is like the first time that money wasn't a concern for most people. And so it's like now it's come full circle. Well, it's been a long time now that for a lot of people, not everybody, and I don't want to sound ignorant, but for a lot of people, like it's just no concern, and it never has been. And in that context, it's like, like I want to expose my son to poverty, and this is a way in which I think it's contextual, maybe just generationally, where it's contextual on so many different levels, but it's just important. I think Shane's message is important for everybody, no matter where they are. And I think he phrases it in such a way that I'm not going to disagree with him pretty much anywhere.
So one of the things that I've been observing lately is that the value of being rich has gone down, because having a lot more money than people who have less money is not as big of a deal as it once was. So like, the obvious examples are things like it's like way easier to purchase a microwave than it once was. Like microwaves used to be like 20 times the cost, or a refrigerator, or having someone come to your house to fix something. Like all these things, the cost of them in relation to your percentage of income is like way down.
Right.
But then the other thing was, you used to have a huge incentive. You used to have more of an incentive to be rich, because if you were rich, then you could buy lots of music, you could buy lots of CDs, you could buy any song you want off of iTunes. But now we just have Spotify. You just pay $10 a month, and a lot of people can afford that. And so if you can get to that level, that's like you have the luxury of what a rich person once had. Same thing with a lot of medical ailments. There's a lot of things that are just like treatable at CVS, whereas before, like you go there, like any of the like 99% of what the average person deals with on a yearly basis, they can just walk down to CVS. They have a very specific treatment for that very specific thing, and they can just get relief almost instantaneously. Or then like Netflix would be another thing. Like it used to be like you have to have lots of money so you could like find good entertainment, and now like some of the best entertainment available costs $10 a month with your Netflix subscription. And so anyways, I think I've just noticed that like it's almost like there's less incentive to be wealthy. People just the bar to have like a comfortable lifestyle is getting lower and lower.
Yeah, and that's something else that a direct takeaway from your conversation, and my thoughts, and frankly, you and I's discussions on this in the past, is what I really like what Shane's doing is it's like he mentioned hot water as a luxury. And that's like a huge like jolt, like reminder, like, everyone has hot water as far as, in the average American's concerned, but that's not the case. And that's like a huge luxury that nobody had 100 years ago. So you're right that poor people in America today live like kings did 150 years ago in terms of having hot water, in terms of not, like they have smartphones, which kings didn't even have. And like you said, unlimited entertainment for next to nothing. So that is true, and that's like the benefits of the market. I put it that way. But on that note, like it's just a huge reminder of how, we think we don't have a lot to give. We're in debt, or we got to save for college. When would you say that to somebody 150 years ago that lived like you did? That they don't have. They said, oh, I don't have any money to give. Well, yeah, of course you do. Even if you're in debt, like your debt's going to be forgiven if you can't pay it. It's literally to that point. This is related. This is a related point. I looked up holiday spending this past year. Estimates put it, I don't think it's been tallied, but estimates put it over $1 trillion in the United States. That is, it's 2 times the GDP of Nigeria, which is, I think it's Africa's largest country. And, it just like this radical idea, like, what if next year everyone just spent half, rather than the 55-inch TV, just get it next year. That if everybody spent half and there's $500 billion left over, that we say, well, we needed it. Well, we didn't. We were going to spend it on just a bunch of stuff. We didn't necessarily need it. What impact does that have on global poverty? And, it's literally just stuff we stick under our Christmas tree. So, hot water itself is a luxury. When he said that, it's just like a huge reminder to me. Something, I think about this stuff a little bit more because I'm friends with you, but it was still a huge reminder of something I totally forget. and then looking around the house, seeing everything else that is an absolute luxury, 10 times more than hot water is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have a few different things that you made me think of. I think in regards to some of the conversations this might just be the people I hang out with, because I talk to the people I talk to. I end up having these conversations a lot. One of the things that I think I've been noticing recently, based on conversations I've had, is that there's a lot of people who are like this was the Christmas where they were like, okay, like why are we
It was the
why are we
same.
doing this song and dance? Yeah. Like why? What is the reason for like us buying stuff and like more stuff, more? Like, why are we still doing that? And people are just like kind of like, I think this was like the Christmas where people are just like, oh, okay, hold on a second.
Yeah,
And I think, and I wonder if that's because of I mean, again, like maybe partially, in part at least, because of like the market. It's like there gets to be a place where you have enough of your comfort taken care of, that having too much becomes a headache. Having too much becomes like stuff you don't want. And then once you get to that place, you can have, the luxury of sitting down and thinking about how you can interact with the poor better. And like, that's another thing that's kind of strange about this, is it's like, we can have this conversation, you and I can have this conversation about poverty, because the groundwork for the amount of wealth and education and all of the things that have added up together so that we can have this conversation was done by a lot of hardworking, wealthy people who didn't give their money away. They invested it, and they were rewarded for their work, so that people like us, one or two generations into our prosperity, we can have these conversations about what it means to be good, with money, what it means to be generous. And like, I think someone like my dad, who's just like one of the hardest working guys I know, and just never complains about anything. I've never once heard him complain about his work. He goes, like, when I was a kid growing up, I think he used to leave the house every single day at like 5 a.m. And he's still doing the same job, and he's still like working hard, driving to work. And he just one of those like types of guys who just like constantly shows up every single day, never complains or anything like that. But it's because of like his mentality, because he saved up for college for me, that I'm able to like have this life where I'm able to take a few more risks, and I'm able to start DonorSee. I'm able to have conversations with you. And I think that that's such a good thing, that's why I think I wince a little bit when I hear people talking about the the market or whatever. I think like, man, the market's done so many good things.
Yeah. Right. I know what you're saying. I think it's important, though, to make sure we're really, really clear and careful about defining excess. Like, what is excess? Is there excess? Like excess wealth, excess stuff?
Excess is the word. That's the word you're right. That's like, maybe, and a lot of this is like a language game. Like, how can you say words that don't trigger people's emotions in a certain way? Because people are certainly tied up with ideas. But if you can reframe like, people have talked about how people have different opinions about illegal immigration. They have different ideas about illegal immigration if you change it to like undocumented aliens or something like that.
Yeah.
And like people, anyways, but there's different ways you can phrase things so that people are more open to ideas. But I think excess is like an interesting topic. It's an interesting conversation.
I think so too, yeah.
And it's not talked about very much at all. I don't think. I'm not sure it is. Like, when was the last time you heard a sermon?
Never.
Just thinking that is like
an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, but my gut feeling is that my reaction, had I heard that brought up before getting to know you well and before taking this stuff seriously, is that, well, I don't have excess. I got a lot of debt, or my house is like smaller than most of my friends' house.
Mm-hmm.
But if you like strip away the relative perspective, like, I have everything I need, and like I have more than excess. I mean, it's like excess on top of excess. And I think everybody does. I think that is where, maybe people like Shane would be more successful if they talked about excess rather than inequality or inequity. Because excess is something I think everybody knows exists. There's no debate.
That was one of the things I thought about naming this conversation. I thought about naming it something like, is inequality the right thing to talk about? because that was how I felt. I was like, inequality doesn't exactly seem to be on the nose of what's really at the heart of this.
Right. Well, like inequality itself is not bad. And my wife actually made the point. She listened to the podcast as well. And she said, like the difference between a poor person in the US and a poor person in Malawi, as far as I've seen it from you, as far as her and I have seen it from your videos, is like far bigger than the difference between a poor person in the United States and a wealthy person in the United States. You know, so like the inequality, like you talk about, the inequality is really third world and first world, and talking about inequality again, like what matters is like the absolute raw differences, and not just the fact that there is inequality.
Yeah, I mean that was like what I was trying to get at. Like when I talked to Shane, one of the things I brought up universal healthcare, and I brought up how like we could redistribute all of the money in America so that everyone has healthcare. I mean, like hypothetically, you could do it so like everyone's healthcare is equal, and you like take money from the richest and you redistribute it in a way. But then like, how is that fair to the people living in the poorest half of the world who like can't get Tylenol?
Yeah.
And like they're like half their kids under 5 years old. You know, like 1 in every 31 women in sub-Saharan Africa die from childbirth. 1 in every 31. So if you had a class of if you went to like I had a private school, and our class was like 50 people, 31 of them were girls. So like one of them would die from every time a child is born. Every time they each have a child. So anyways, yeah, the wealth disparity between the first world and the third world is something that I am really passionate about talking about. And that's why I think it's like a distraction to talk about like US politics. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't our lives are so great. They're awesome. We're spending $1 trillion on Christmas. Like, we're doing fine.
Yeah.
Even like the poorest people who have for the most part like iPhones and iMacs and things, like not universally. I mean, maybe they don't have hot water, but like most people do. It's like and the people who don't, a lot, like for the most part, like I'll give this example: a homeless person. I'm getting really riled up, as you can tell. But I think of like a homeless person living in New York City. That homeless person has like 20 different homeless shelters that they can choose from. They're not going to go hungry. They're probably going to be fat. Like there's a direct proportion between obesity and poverty in America. So like the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be overweight. Where obviously it's a place like sub-Saharan Africa, the poorer you are, the more likely you or your kids are to starve to death. Like that's like the reality. So anyways, yeah, I get really passionate about the difference between the first world and the third world. And I wish, like, to me, that's like the big conversation everyone should be having, especially Americans.
To bring this back to an earlier point, though, that it's like another point where I don't blame or fault Shane or people like him, because I just think the big takeaway for most people is like, wow, like there are a lot of poor people in the world and in this country.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that, or up until this point, I never even cared. So
I just think if you compare yourself to someone who's like poor in America, what you do is you say, oh, that person might be poor, but they have access to opportunity, and they can they have access to a really great job market with a 0% unemployment right now. And they have access to like enormous, like lots of like networking opportunities, and they have government programs. Like they have so many different things that they can get access to. And then so like, in some ways, I don't really blame people for, like, most poor people have the opportunity, like homeless people. The big issue, the reason it's so hard to address is because it's a psychological issue. It's like rarely someone, it's like rarely a poverty thing. It's like rarely like not having enough. It's almost always some kind of psychological, like mental thing. That's why they're on the streets. Whereas in other parts of the world, it's truly like a resource disparity problem.
Yeah.
And yeah, and anyways, that's why I kind of sympathize with people who are, you know, not too excited about talking about poverty in America, because it's like I kind of get it. It's like they have access to a lot of things that people in other parts of the world don't, and I really want to focus all my attention on them. Yeah, I know what you're saying, though. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, well, so put it this way then. What about just attitude, like personal attitude, and using poverty as a way to expose our propensity to just ignore our wealth and just, you know, think that it's like amoral, it doesn't matter. I think it's like useful in that regard, because it is a little bit easier to relate to homelessness, you know, in downtown, you know, Washington, D.C., than to relate to like abject poverty like you saw in Malawi. So, at the very least, if it's not like about helping the poor, it's about spiritual, I guess, just awakening or awareness among people like us that have a lot to give that didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that I've had a number of conversations where, because like I've gone through an evolution where there was a time when I was like, poverty exists, poverty exists, poverty exists. And then to me, that conversation often ended up in people saying like, yeah, I know, I just don't know what to do about it. Like, I know it exists. I just don't know like where to go with it. Like, and that's why American poverty, like to me, that's where American poverty leads. It's like, for the most part, it's like, it's so complicated because it's like a way deeper thing than just like a lack of resources, like way deeper. It's almost never a lack of resources.
Yeah.
And it may, there's it's complicated. And I think like the thing about what Shane was saying that I do resonate with is that, spending time with those people is the right, like that's the right reaction to it. When I think of like how I'm running my organization. One of my main jobs is like fundraise, like encouraging people to give. Like in some ways I'm a fundraiser. And so the way that my brain works is like a very pragmatic, like how can I communicate things in a way that will be compelling to people? Mm-hmm. And I've just not found it very, I think this is what I'm getting at. Like, I think this is another thing I've thought about recently is I think that it used to be the case that you had to talk in very simple terms and you had to have shiny pamphlets and you had to be like, if you're the CEO of a charity, you just tell people like, we're like, you give to us and we'll do everything behind the curtain. And that's the relationship we're going to have. And I think that is like how things used to be done for the last several decades. And what I'm sensing is that the new way that charity is done is out in the open, fully transparent, where we're just telling you, like, listen, we're trying this and we're trying this, and there's mistakes happening here, and we're taking this percentage. And people just want in on those conversations. Like, they want to be invested and have knowledge of it, and they don't want everything done behind the curtain like they used to be. And so I think that's another thing. Like, as someone who's a communicator, as someone who's trying to empower people to use their resources to make a difference. Mm-hmm. I think like the coming generation is a generation that's like way more involved and invested, and like they want the nuance in a way that I think an older generation didn't care for as much.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. Do you think there's as much value, and is it as effective or maybe even more effective to appeal to people's, own personal desire to give over and above the effectiveness of their gift? Or like in Shane's case, I get the sense from him, like I've said, I feel like his message is a lot more about awareness of your own blind spots than it is like, here's a really effective way to help the poor. And he wants people to start giving and start engaging, not necessarily find the absolute best way to do that. Now, DonorSee is about, from my perspective, is about like a very, very efficient, direct, good way to give. A transparent way to give, and like that's been a lot of your marketing. I think it's just, I guess you mentioned your thoughts. Do you think it would be as effective or even more effective to appeal to people's desire, to give something, and they don't really know, like you said, they don't know how to do it?
Yeah, so I always tell people like just start. Like I'm totally on board with that idea, because I do think like if someone just starts, they will probably make mistakes, but if they truly have a heart to serve the poor, they will work through it. And I've talked to so many people who like they get in over their head, they try and help, and then they end up like screwing it up and making a big mistake. But it's mm-hmm. a learning experience, and then they go on to do really great things. And so I never want to like discourage people. And in some ways, like earlier we talked about some of the controversial blogs I wrote. In some ways, I was trying to just get people going. I was just like, just go in that direction, because it is such an urgent issue, and I do think that is like one way to do it. But I question how effective it is, honestly. Like, because I tried it to some extent, and I've seen other people try it, and I'm not sure. I'm I'm not sure how much it accomplishes. Like
Yeah.
in some ways, it just creates noise. And I'm not sure how
appealing to people's personal need or personal feelings of needing to give versus giving up.
Well, no, I mean, in some way, like if you're like if you say things that are inflammatory or are kind of like a disregard for effectivity, I think that kind of just does create noise. I think what is the better option. This is what I'm thinking as of late is I think the best option is to what I'm trying to cultivate is a personality where I'm honest and transparent, and I explain things to the people who are involved in what I'm doing, and I bring them along, and I answer their questions as best as I can, and I am honest about my flaws, but also it's like I also talk about like the complexities of it. I guess I'm really just like pro having complex conversations about like this really complex issue, like and then I really worry about oversimplifications.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I see what you're
I think
saying.
there's a huge danger in oversimplifications, but maybe I might be wrong about that. But that's how I've been acting. That's how I've been operating lately.
Yeah, I guess that gets back to the same issue of me being very forgiving of any issues or disagreements I have with people like Shane, whose message I think is super simple.
Yeah,
Um,
and like needs to be listened to. Its most
right.
fundamental points.
I mean, it's almost like, I was listening to him. And again, I haven't read one of his books. I've just seen a lot of he's been very active. I think he was maybe even more active back when I was in college, and I would follow what he wrote and what he said. And I think I've always thought of it almost as like a prophet. And, the prophet, like you read like Isaiah or Jeremiah, and sometimes it just sounds insane. And there's so many ways you could, I'm guessing, like in that time and place, if they say, something is going to happen because of your disobedience, to say, well, look, there's like a lot of people being obedient. Like it's not really that big of a problem. And I'm just guessing but that perspective, a lot of people face that same, that same criticism. A lot of people that end up achieving a lot, or in retrospect, we see them as big achievers, people who raised actual awareness in a big area. It's like a common criticism that it's so easy to make of people like that, to say, this isn't a problem. This isn't a problem. But I think that can be evidence that, like, okay, maybe there is like a blind spot at the very least when it comes to this, that some people are so passionate about it and other people are so passionate that it's not true. When, like, what's the harm in acknowledging it? I don't think there's any harm in people
What are you talking about now? Acknowledging what? Poverty?
Poverty in this case, yeah,
Okay.
or whatever big issue, that you're promoting.
Yeah, well, this kind of brings up the old conversation about slacktivism. You and I think, were roommates when Kony 2012 came out.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was like super inspirational actually thinking about it, that in part led to me eventually like moving to Africa and caring about the poor. And like for all of the ineffectivity that people could claim about it, I'm in part a result of the awareness that film brought. Even though you could claim it was not a good way to go about it, in some ways just being loud and obnoxious, and not obnoxious, but just like, I mean, slick or whatever. In some ways it accomplished quite a lot. It accomplished what it was meant to do, even if there were critiques you could make about it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
definitely. Yeah, I think it just comes down to your goals and your calling. I think Shane is called to poverty in this country, as far as I understand, which is real, to some degree, whether it's as serious of a problem as poverty abroad or not. And then,
what gets me is he spent time in Calcutta, India, with Mother Teresa. So I'm just, I know that he's like spent time in these like super far out places, and
right.
like maybe, so I don't know why he doesn't kind of give more attention to that.
Could be though. It could lend more weight to what he's saying, and that maybe we should take this more seriously. And like the fact is, there is relative poverty in the United States. So it's, I guess, is is it the case that we have to fix poverty everywhere else? We have to make it like, perfectly even. When if people feel called and led to give and aid in their local communities, that's a good thing that is good for people. It's good for the poor people, and it's good for people spiritually that are involved.
Yeah.
I've always thought of DonorSee as I think of it most often, for better or worse, when evaluating my own perspective and like spiritual perspective on wealth and poverty. So it definitely is like more of a personal. And it sounds selfish to say that, but it's like I would give when I really feel compelled, or what's the word? I really feel like I realize how much I have, and it's not so much I'm out to look for certain kinds of projects. I only would give at this point on DonorSee because I know, like as you've shown, exactly.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. I think Nick froze for a second. We'll see if he comes back. My apologies. I'm watching myself. I'm just going to wait a couple more seconds to see if Nick comes back. It looks like he's still part of this call, but I don't know exactly what happened. To the people watching at this very moment, thank you for sticking with us. Nick's saying that his Wi-Fi went out. Sorry, everybody. I'm going to see if I can bring him back, but it seems like he's coming back. Okay, good. I want to continue this conversation. Nick and I had talked about having a long conversation, and we wanted to see what came from it. And so, yeah, even though his Wi-Fi cut out, we'll try and keep it going. Yeah. Hey, man. Okay. Nick, I'm looking at a black screen right now. When we convert this to a podcast, I'll try and cut this stuff out. To the people who are watching, you guys are champs. I'm so grateful that you're sticking with it. Hi, Nick.
Hey, sorry about that. I just got this new office today, and Wi-Fi just got out.
Oh, that's okay. I'll try and cut this out later. I don't think I can cut it out in the video, but people will probably just be able to skip ahead if they need to.
Yeah, sounds good.
Where were we?
I was talking about the personal, how so much of giving for me is personal, and it comes from a personal place of obligation than it does as far as from effective giving. But that again, like I said, I give through DonorSee when I do, and maybe it's because I don't question so much.
Well, yeah, I just want to clarify. I don't think that compassion should be extracted out of poverty. Like one of the reasons DonorSee is set up in a way where you directly support people is because it's trying to provoke, it's intentionally trying to provoke compassion, and I hope it does that, and I hope it is able to build meaningful relationships through the platform for people who live in very different parts of the world. So I'm not trying, like, I don't think, like, I think when you extract compassion out and you're just purely focused on the effective, I'm not sure that that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, from like a marketing perspective, just a strategic perspective, I guess I agree with that. And I think that
not
Shane
even from a marketing perspective, just from in my opinion, and based on my experience, I think the only way to have genuine charity is for compassion to be involved in it. Otherwise, it's kind of a strange. If you're just like, if it's a very calculated thing that you're doing, it's kind of a strange. It's kind of strange because it's not exactly like. It's not exactly coming from this like your soul or something inside of you. It's coming from. Just like a purely rational place, and I have this sense or this feeling that it might not be what's best for the person on the receiving end of it to be treated that way.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's something I haven't thought about, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming back on. And I appreciate you having this conversation. I'm too bad we had the internet cut out, but this was really good.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Again, this is my New Year's resolution is done now, so I appreciate
yeah. Okay, cool, man. Well, you have a great rest of 2019, and I'll see you later today, probably.
Sounds good. Yeah, see you.
Okay, bye.